This episode is brought to you by Asset Watch. Asset Watch helps manufacturers prevent costly equipment failures by using vibration monitoring and machine health data to spot problems early, before they turn into downtime. Their predictive maintenance solutions give teams clear insights so that they can work smarter, not harder. Thanks to Asset Watch for supporting the show. To learn how Asset Watch can help you catch equipment issues early, visit assetwatch.com. Now we hope you enjoy the episode.
Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Bevavino, host of the Mobius Connect podcast, focused on connecting military veterans to the maintenance and reliability community. Our aim here is to bridge the understanding gap between the military and civilian worlds, thereby improving the veteran transition experience and ultimately providing hope and a helping hand to any of our brothers and sisters out there struggling to find their way. We'll do this by interviewing veterans who have successfully made it through. For this session, we've chosen to interview one such Army veteran, John Shepard, whose fascinating and patriotic story is a must-listen for anyone interested in joining us on this mission. Hey, John, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Eric, thanks for the invite, and I appreciate that awesome introduction, and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, instead of reading your resume, we will talk through your resume today. And as it's been, like we mentioned a few days ago, maybe 20 years since we spoke, and we're colleagues at Chevron back in the day. So it was great to reconnect and get in touch with you and see what you're up to now. Where are you calling in from today?
Yeah, I'm calling in from Houston, Texas, and if I could go back to what you just said, it had been a long time since we had worked together, yet I think it really speaks to the veterans community, how you can not see a veteran or even a former colleague for many years, and then you just pick up right where you left off. It had been a long time since I had heard brother mentioned like that, and whether it's a sister, and it warmed my heart, and it was again, kind of just what you do in creating a forum for our veterans as they transition on military life into what their next mission, I think, is really great.
Well, those are the exact words that came to mind. It is a special community, and picking up where you left off, I mean, how many times do you reconnect with old veteran friends and it's just like kind of yesterday,
Yeah.
right? And, you cover the highlights of whether it's 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and you're back on track in a trusted relationship that, when we met, I think we're probably both in sales roles, or I might have been in a marketing role, but a marketing role that you ended up, inheriting later in your career, which I think is hilarious and great, but also it shows the similarities in what veterans can do, as well as our flexibility. We're often recruited into sales roles because of the stick-to-itiveness, the independent nature of what we can do, and not being intimidated or afraid of big numbers or missions or whatever. It's like, okay, that's what I got to go do. Let's figure out how to go do it. But you've since migrated into more of an operations planning, linking strategy to tactics in the field or execution in the field. And I really want to get into that today, because I think that's the sweet spot. Not only does it speak to what Mobius is about in maintenance and reliability, making sure the right parts are ready at the right time in the right quantity for precision maintenance to take place, and reliability enhancement, success and all that type of stuff. But it also goes to the sweet spot of where I think many veterans end up residing, because we're all trained in mission accomplishment, project management, whether we realize it or not while we're going through it. That's part of who we are. So you're calling from Houston. We first met working together a long time ago, and Chevron, probably 20 years or so.
Yeah.
So why don't we start with who you are and what you do today, and then we'll dial it back to the early years. Sound good?
Yeah, sure. Sounds great. Growing up as a kid, I always was fascinated with the military. I really enjoyed military history. I was a voracious reader of World War II history primarily. I was into model airplanes, so It looked like the ceiling of my bedroom was a battlefield over in World War II. And it really was a life goal to join the military, right? And uh, was an active member in junior RTC in high school for 4 years. And ultimately, when it kind of made that decision to choose my branch of service, I chose the U.S. Army, and was awarded a 3-year Army military scholarship based on my academics and my extracurriculars, and I then chose the University of Oklahoma.
Right in middle America, oil country. All right,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sure. Yep.
There's going to be a lot of rhymes, with our conversation today, and almost full circle moments, right? Going back to what you said with our time at Chevron together.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I remember just the modeling and the airplanes. It's funny, you go into places like we go into Michael's, kids do all sorts of crafts, crocheting and whatnot. I have two daughters, and the models section is a lot smaller. It's mostly snap together type stuff for Legos, right? Legos have really
Yeah,
sort of taken over, but it's not quite the same, I don't think. But hanging your models from fishing line or whatever, displaying them. I mean, it was pretty cool, and a lot of the older generation helped with
yeah,
that, with fine painting schemes, and that was cool though. But it taught you how to take pieces and parts together and learn. I think part of the modeling process is learning the structure and the names of things,
that's right.
right? Because you understand how they go together. And now the model's not a complete exact replication of every little detail, electrical systems, hydraulic systems, stuff like that. But a lot of it is quite similar. And if
Yeah,
it's a simple machine, then it's pretty darn close. And Legos actually doing better with that too. But anyway,
yeah.
fascinating. Yeah, good. So did you have any members of your family that were in the military prior to you, or you were the first one?
I had I had two grandparents. One was in the Merchant Marines in World War II, and then another grandparent who was in the Air Force post World War II. But we were a family that didn't have really a call to service, that I would say, or maybe my father or any uncles. But there is through our family those who served in the Air Force primarily, and that was foundational to my desires and my goals. Yet really, it was my personal drive. There was um, a, a call to service in addition to the opportunity that I learned later on, but really began to appreciate it, especially as an officer working with the best and the brightest that America has to offer. Yet, frankly, it was fun as a field artillery officer to shoot big guns and and blow stuff up, which what you can't you by naive to not want to do, right?
Right on, right on, right. Directly aligns with the male sort of aggressiveness at that age, and boom, 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 blow it up. Here we go. So tell me more about that. So, what were your assignments once you graduated from college and you were commissioned? Did some training, moved around, did some other stuff? What'd that look like?
Yeah, so after I graduated with a bachelor's degree, was commissioned a second lieutenant in the field artillery, and 2 months later, I think, was reported for duty at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, for the field artillery officer basic course, which at the time, I don't know if that is the case today, was the second officer basic course in terms of time to complete and graduate
Hmm.
behind the aviation officer basic course. It was 4 months of really intense training, really in two areas: fire support as an observer, calling in artillery, mortars, supporting close air support, attack aviation. And then the second was really the technical aspect of field artillery, because it's all about angles, deflections, elevations, and math on the gunnery side, with learning how to calculate fire direction and fire solutions to meet the 5 requirements of accurate, predictable fire, and be the king of battle. So it was a basic course that what was in some ways a gentleman's course. They wanted you to graduate and to pass, because they were investing in you, not only just with the time, but with the significant investment. Yet it was challenging, primarily on the manual gunnery side. We were learning gunnery with I don't know, with in the 50s and 60s, the slide rules on how to do math and algebra, and that's how we learned how to calculate fire missions before we graduated to at the time these monochrome DOS based computers, where you would input all the data and then they would do it all digitally for you. So after graduating from the officer basic course, was deployed to the Republic of Korea as a fire support officer for the 2nd Infantry Division, 1st of the 9th Infantry Battalion, Manchu. And I was stationed about 30 kilometers north of Seoul, and then about 30 kilometers south of demilitarized zone for a year time, and was responsible for supporting infantry battalion, which was a mechanized, also had an attachment of tanks attached to it, and support the joint security area and the mission in the Republic of Korea, and supporting our partner with the ROK Army.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
First tour. I mean, I think unless you're over there or you're just really familiar with geography, many people won't realize that Seoul, which I believe is the biggest city in South Korea, is only 60 kilometers from the DMZ, which, what is that in miles? About 15, 20 miles, something
about that, like that. Yeah.
Something like that. I mean, so if the bubble goes up, so to speak, or the crap hits the fan, it's not very long, or it could be a very short period of time between access to the bad guys to one of the largest cities in South Korea. So really, really important mission. Still, I guess the war is still going on officially, has never been ended. So did you learn to eat kimchi? What was that like?
I did. My year time over there was really a formative experience for me personally and professionally. I didn't get to travel as much as I would have liked to see the sites, and as we spent most of our time deployed, and either as a show of force or to support the Republic of Korean Army, and also respond to a pretty dynamic situation geopolitically, and then even with the military, as you pointed out, they were still actively there. There's only been a ceasefire or a truce. So I enjoyed that. The people were so kind. I didn't have a negative experience even on leave when we had the opportunity to go to Seoul. The food was great, and it really, as a young officer but a young American, gave me the opportunity to live in another country for a year and develop empathy and understanding and patience, and also support the mission, right? So great time. And it was only a year, and after a year I said, okay, I'm done. And PCS back to the United States, and was again kind of this full circle moment that we're going to talk about. It ended up back at Fort Sill at the Field Artillery School, and assigned to 2nd Battalion, 2nd Field Artillery, which is a light howitzer battalion that supports the Field Artillery School, training the enlisted and non-commissioned officers and officers in fire support. Interesting little factoid with the 2nd Battalion, with 22FA, as we called it, is that they're one of the only, I think, 1 or 2 units next to the old guard, if I recall, that actually had a mascot. And we had a donkey named Big Deuce. We were on number 7 during my time from 98 to 2001. And then we had a goat called Short Round as well. I think he was number 4. And they were the mascots. They had their own pen, and my battery was responsible for their health and care, and would feed them and make sure they got to be where they needed to be for ceremonies and such. But that
super
was kind of
important.
neat.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's super
yeah.
important to keep Short Round and Big Deuce healthy. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the second thing too, and this is time, right? This is 1998. Obviously, this was pre-GWAT, 9/11, and then post Desert Storm, where there was drawdown, right? And there were still some hot spots, obviously, Korea being one of them. But our battalion in support of the Field Artillery School would shoot more rounds than the entire 82nd Division artillery, and we had 12 howitzers, right? So we were always in the field. The op tempo was always high. As a battery executive officer, making sure that we were at the right time at the right place, supporting the Field Artillery School missions of the day. We were shooting 3 to 4 times a week, and moving 105 millimeter artillery rounds all across the post, right? And I learned a lot about flexibility, learned more about artillery, and then how to, also honing my leadership skills with keeping the motivation and morale of at that time a high op tempo unit. That at the same time, we had a battalion commander who was a Mustang. He was a prior service enlisted E7 drill sergeant. He was with the 82nd most of his time and jumped into Grenadier or Panama, I can't remember. But he was a big advocate of like, hey, you're at the schoolhouse for a couple of years, but you also need to be trained so you can go to your next unit and be immediately deployable. So on top of all the training that we were doing supporting the schoolhouse, as we called it, we were learning how to be deployable artillerymen and artillerywomen, and learning how all the techniques, tactics, and procedures. We built fire bases. We did workups to deploy to the Joint Readiness Training Center in Louisiana, loading howitzers and trucks onto railheads, for example. So it was a whirlwind experience of 2 years of being a battery executive officer, and then the battalion operations officer, which really was a great opportunity to have a broader impact to the battalion, planning all the operations in support of the schoolhouse for the unit itself, rather than my small company battery that I had in my previous stint. That also helped really develop the foundation of my interest in supply chain and supply chain planning, and the steps that you, and the mindsets that you have to develop are very similar from military planning or military operations planning at a battalion or a company level. You directly correlate to a business, right?
Well, without a doubt, and a couple of things that came to mind when you were describing your experience. I mean, still very relevant today. I mean, if you listen to the other veteran-based podcasts where folks are talking about calling in airstrikes, and I don't know if artillery was used as much in Iraq and Afghanistan, but certainly the danger close type of stuff, and all these forward deployed units really needed to understand exactly how to do that. So that's interesting. Interesting that you saw a slide rule. A lot of people couldn't identify that these days, but you need to know it. If the lights go out and the electronics go off, you need to be able to do something, as well as the amount of leadership and responsibility in an early age. So as a young officer, just a couple years in, becoming an executive officer and operations officer. I mean, operations is really the soup to nuts sort of business. Yes, you need to keep an eye on training to support the soup to nuts business of the military. You got to know what the concept is, what the strategy is. every step along the way, not to micromanage it, but just to make sure there's sort of a project timeline that continues to flow, giving responsibility to your folks and, making sure they have what they need and keeping some air cover, some administrative air cover, so they can actually get done what they need to get done on a day to day.
Yeah, absolutely right. And when you talk about the similarities between military planning or fires planning with sales operations planning, which is a business process that aligns supply, demand, whether it's your MRO parts for your pump or even consumer products, whether it's like shampoo, having to align that demand to the supply and to operations into that one cohesive operating plan that achieves that commander's intent or the CEO's intent on accomplishing the business strategy, right? And the second thing is the orchestration and the collaboration, right? The behaviors, the mindset, the leadership needed, whether it's through authority or what I found even in my military career, influence, right? Being able to build relationships that are collaborative with your peers or even with adjacent units if you're forward deployed, right? And when we talk about clearance of fires from the artillery side or even the forward line of troops to make sure that the artillery isn't putting any troops in danger with either a fratricide, for example, right? So the mindset, really, it was a great opportunity to learn and make mistakes and fall forward learning, because it's my belief that people don't join the service or even come to work to fail, right?
Right.
Or
Yeah, sure.
also that they come to work to do their best. And so mistakes are going to happen, and as leaders, we have to create that psychological safety of, hey, you know what? Let's learn from this, what happened, and reflect on it, and then put the processes in place that or the tools to make sure they don't happen again. You know what? You speak to the reliability and maintenance. I jump to human organizational performance, which is this concept of that humans are always going to make mistakes, and it's about what do you put in place to set them up for success, right? And that kind of comes circle back again, that having that opportunity to be responsible for $10 million of equipment and being an operations officer that was firing 80,000 rounds of 105 millimeter in peacetime per year, and all the logistics and supporting of the schoolhouse, that responsibility and that accountability, that experience to learn from those mistakes, as I mentioned, really was foundational to my career in corporate life.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it also gives a glimpse, right? You mentioned it briefly, but a real failure in military planning that impacts the lives of not only the people that get killed, but their families and their cohorts and stuff like this, is friendly fire, right? This
Yeah.
I think, is it called fratricide? Is that the correct term
I
that
think,
you use?
yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
Or friendly fire, and I think it's high stakes, right?
yeah. High stakes in
Yeah,
combat,
right.
right? For sure. And from what I understand, it happens more often in the fog of war than a lot of people realize, right? But when you transition that mindset of, like, if we screw up, people are going to die, to corporate life where people don't die, but profits die, or people's reputation gets degraded or something like that, it minimizes their career potential or the potential of the company, right? It's serious. And coming from a veteran mindset, you're already taking it seriously, because
That's right.
your formative years, your formative training was that if this goes wrong or we do something incorrectly, then lives are on the line. Whereas in corporate, when you see, and this goes to perhaps some of the frustration, right, or some of the challenges that veterans have in corporate life, when not everybody sees it the same way. So it's not only a lesson for veterans to like, hey, just cool your jets. This is a different sort of environment. It's still important, but different sort of environment. And for folks who are working with veterans or looking to hire them, that there's another gear here. There's another level that these folks like us can draw in whenever necessary.
Yeah.
And if we're drawing it in and it's not the time, then just understand where we're coming from and meet us where we're at, and everything will be okay.
I think you're right there, and it comes back to kind of that trust in the relationships that are so foundational. Or when I think about my time in the Army, the relationships of your battle buddy, as we called it, right? That you knew that he had your back, and vice versa, right? And then the tuning of the intensity level, and as you transition um, uh, from military service to the public sector, or to corporate life, you still you have to come to work as who you are, and be authentic, right? It's just about that little tuning and that course correction to know, either reflectively, or seek that feedback from a peer or from your leader to say, okay, you know what, tune it down a little, and then being able to turn it on when you need to in a high stakes situation, but with the appropriate approach that fits the situation, but also the culture of the organization, right? I mean, to your point, the stakes are diametrically different in terms of lives versus profits. Maybe I think about being a supply chain professional for the last 15 years in an industrial manufacturing environment, working with teams and plants. The stakes can be equally high, right? And
True. Yeah, especially
if our
in the oil
plans
business.
yeah, and I mean, you're working under pressures, and raw materials that can cause burns, or health conditions. And so one of the things that I thought a lot about was how to develop reliable plans that were predictable, granted the variance of the business and that variability, and that you can't, perfection isn't possible or required, but ultimately keeping the folks at the line safe, right? And protect the people, and safeguard the assets, so that you don't get into a hustle mode, or a hurry up, or even firefighting, right? When you're in a supply chain role in a plant environment, especially from the lubricants industry, where you have that customer order that needs to come in earlier than expected, or we're having to expedite raw materials in to meet that order, that there's still an operational discipline that really speaks to reliability that you still have to maintain, and you can't introduce it's not safe, because then it impacts the customer experience as well if you start to take shortcuts or feel that pressure of that stress to get it done, and get the product out the door, right?
Yep, without a doubt. And I think we both experienced times of relative calm and stability in the lubricant business, and also in our military careers. But the times can you describe a time perhaps recently that was unusual, and you had to call on your military experience or your leadership experience, both
Yeah.
to get through it? I know I experienced it as well, and this is something very similar between us, since we were both actively engaged in the business several years ago. I guess it's been like 6 now or so, but can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. The supply chains and businesses today are experiencing disruptions now more than ever, whether it's tariffs, geopolitical, or the war in Iran, and those are more
Yeah.
commonplace nowadays than maybe even pre-March of 2020, which we all know when I said that what that is, right? In COVID, and so that was really an experience, both personally, for all of us, right, in the world, going through the pandemic and figuring out and the uncertainty of it, and trying to keep your family safe and your friends safe, and then at the same time, work was it was surreal, I guess, is the only word I could say about it, and that even applies professionally, right? I mean, I remember March 8th of 2020, like it was yesterday. My boss comes in and says, "Hey, we're hearing that the president's gonna issue a lockdown, so we're closing down the office and go home." And this was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then we'll call you to come back. And we didn't go back for 2 years, right? And I had just hired a new employee to be a planner on the team. He was a week into the job, and he didn't even have a cell phone yet. And I go into his little, he didn't even have an office. I'm like, "Hey, we're going home, and we'll call you when we come back." And I remember putting together my office. I had just a few little personal items in my office, and I took down my calendar and my little place where or holder of pens, and I'm like, I don't think I'm going back here for a while. Right?
Very Spartan existence there.
Yeah,
Your holder of pens and your calendar. Yeah. That's all I need.
Yeah. I have almost a Protestant work ethic. Work hard, play hard. But I did just my personal preference not to have too many personal items in the office, which makes me mobile to do what happened. I was like, "Oh, you need me to go home because of a pandemic? I'm out of here. You can't beat me out the door," kind of deal, right?
Yeah.
But COVID was needless to say, and it was an understatement, a significant impact on all of us as people, and then with businesses. And as the planning manager for Chevron Lubricants in Americas, my second responsibility was as a crisis management, or what is called the business continuity coordinator. So I was responsible for aligning with our emergency response management and teams within the Chevron value chain, sales, marketing, and operations, to maintain continuity of supply throughout the pandemic. And I can't go any further without talking about the operators and the operations folks at the plants. They were designated as essential workers. They were there 5 days a week, and adapting and putting themselves at risk. Granted, we did develop protocols, PPE, but even in the summer, when you're wearing a mask on top of your fire resistant clothing or your hard hat, it creates stress, right? And those folks did it day in, day out without complaints for almost 2 years. And they kept the country running, because as nobody, a truck can't move, it doesn't have gasoline or motor oil in it. And that was really inspiring, but also motivating for me to make sure that they had the resources that they need, coordinating with health, safety, environmental. As we learned about in the military, they always say the enemy gets a vote. Well, in this case, the enemy was the pandemic and the uncertainty, right? And balancing the priorities of and the commanders of 10 is say, hey, we have to keep people safe, right? And you got to go home in the same condition you showed up in. And then protecting the assets, and then that the business also has to continue on, right? And we were a seasoned team. We had gone through several disruptions beforehand, and so there was that trust from not just within my peer group of other leaders, as I was the incident commander working across the value chain, yet also with my team, the direct reports who worked for me. They know that they knew that I had their back, and vice versa, and that even cascaded down to the operations teams. It was more challenged because we had to do that virtually, right? And so building that empathy and that trust was super important, and it really gave me the opportunity to hone my soft skills and leadership, and that influencing leadership style of leading with curiosity, asking questions, and
Not jumping to
tuning,
conclusions. Yeah.
yeah, not jumping to conclusions, but also not driving to decisions to make sure we're making the best decisions
Yeah.
for that balance all of those priorities, right? Because not only jumping to conclusions as veterans, there can be that tendency, you see the problem and you can see it very quickly, and then you're moving to decision, okay, let's go, right? And there's a lot of value, and I think in those behaviors of taking the initiative and that 80-20 mindset, which is important no matter what. If you're a manager or a leader, um, that you can't get 100% of the data, right? And there has to be some, and how you manage risk, right? Was some of the other things that I learned over those 18 months. And it really set the stage for Winter Storm Uri, which 2 years later in 2023 knocked out 20% of, if I recall, the petrochemical business, which in the Gulf Coast. Winter Storm Uri was that storm of ice ages, right? And it was a similar problem to solve, right? And all disruptions follow are rhyming. They all are similar in terms of what its impact on the business is, what its impact on the team is, and then how you manage it. And I think there are three things, right? It's having a playbook and a plan, which really spoke to me from my military background, that there are SOPs for everything in the military, and they are also in an industrial manufacturing environment, task conditions and standards, tactics, techniques, procedures, which is that playbook of, okay, this is the plan, right? And then the partners and relationships to execute that plan. And then that continuous improvement. If you're executing the plan and you're taking in new information every day, you're testing your decisions. Some decisions go the way you want. Sometimes they don't, and you learn from them and you improve. And the two things that really are similar with the military is the famous rock drill, right? Before you cross the line of departure, and you rehearse the plan, and you got the big map that you've laid out on the ground, and everybody goes through their roles. And that's important too, is everybody knows what the role is, what the decisions need to be made at this point, what are the outcomes, or in the artillery language, what the effects we're looking for to help shape or influence the battlefield, support the maneuver. That same mindset I took to COVID. So it was just a problem to solve, and then and eat the elephant in chunks, right? And then still keep that commander's intent of keep our people safe, right? Protect the assets, and then keep that continuity of supply. And in our case, which was so vital for not just the business, but for the country, and really globally, because it was a global pandemic, right?
Yep. And they were fortunate to have you in that role, without a doubt. Hopefully, they appreciated it for what it was, and wasn't just like, oh, this is just standard. Anybody could have been that good, in running the crisis response. But no, it's this Army artillery officer in there taking charge and leading with empathy and making sure everybody gets home every night like they plan on doing it. Yeah, it was our first time for everybody on doing business almost entirely via Zoom, right? Yeah. So we were disconnected. We had so that's where that trust really comes into play. So when you say the rock drill, it reminds me, in my mind immediately goes to dirt dive. So I'm not sure if that's exactly the same thing, but you're talking about a bigger thing of like maybe putting rocks in the dirt, and like, you're going to be here, you're going to be here, this is north whatever. In our dirt dives, it was just like, okay, this is where we start. We put divers in the water, they go to the project, they move about, they do whatever they're going to do, they come back, they do this, and then they're up and over. A lot simpler, like just a short glimpse of something. Is that a good analogy? Yeah. Okay.
It is, and it's just practicing the plan. It's rehearsing, right? And it's uncovering it's uncovering. Well, the plan was this, but now it looks like that, or in a military setting. Well, and when we think about the enemy gets a vote. Well, what happens if they do this? Finding out, learning about that, and then having a contingency plan to deal with that. That same mindset applies even in the business world, right? Is that you got to rehearse, You got to practice, just like professional sports, using that analogy, right? So when it's game time, you're able to do what you need to do, get the outcomes that you're looking for, right? Maybe going back to COVID, there's what really helped in my leadership style and my growth, but also in working with my team, and then peers as well, is this concept of e-colors and by this company called Equilibria, and this guy that I've had a long relationship with, Louis Senior. And it divides your brain into four quadrants: the thinker, the talker, the relator, and the doer, and it assigns colors. And going through that exercise was allowed me to learn who I was as a thinker and as a communicator, and really helped in relating and building that relationship with not just my team but others. So you build that empathy, right? I mean, when I learned more patience, again, more empathy, and leading with curiosity, because I know that I'm asking somebody to in a virtual environment, continue to do their job, and they've got a 5-year-old that they have to make sure gets online to do their homework. Or I remember the dogs going back. Dogs would bark on conference calls, and before COVID, people would get upset about it, and now it's almost like a common joke. But kind of that empathy too, and really putting yourself in other people's place, and being present, was instrumental too to navigating COVID, and then Winter Storm Uri, but also my leadership style moving forward and on my next mission.
No, yeah, we had a similar quadrant-based personality profile. I can't recall the name at the moment. It'll probably come back to me by the end of the call here. But yeah, it's very interesting to see where you line up, where your boss lines up, where your peers line up, where your direct reports line up, and your counterparts across the value chain in the organization. So you can, like, oh, now I understand why this is happening a little bit better. But yeah, this a great experience for you, John, and great opportunity to put your, in more intrinsic or early in life learned skills from the Army into play in the corporate world. And when you mentioned the scenario planning, which I believe is part of all, worst case plans, but not everybody does them the same way, and not everybody takes the time to sort of war game it out. The enemy has the vote, and if the enemy is a pandemic, or it's an industrial accident, like which happened towards, I think, the tail end of COVID, we thought we were through it. Then one of the biggest toll blenders and grease manufacturers in the country, exploded on fire, an industrial accident, which then is like, we're not through with this yet. But it created all sorts of turmoil. So that's interesting. I think, again, they're fortunate to have you in the position you were fortunate to be, in the right place at the right time, and it was a great experience, it sounds like. Yeah, we were competing at the time, and
that's right.
Yeah, we had different contingencies, and different, perhaps, supply chain nodes of risk, perhaps, is probably the best way to put it, without saying any more. And we're able to take advantage of some of those things, but we suffered, and lost business and gained business just like everybody else. So I think what it taught a lot of people is to have a backup plan. Totally. This just-in-time program that had been flourishing since I don't know when, sometime around when I started my career, or even when in the Navy in the 90s, sort of fell apart.
It exposed a lot of risks. It exposed a lot of weaknesses within not just supply chains, but businesses, right? And how they perceived risk, what was really important to them when you have that black swan event, like the grease manufacturer. which my tenure, I spent over 7 years as in this role. Enjoyed every minute. I thought it was the best job in Chevron. I always will look fondly upon it, and great people, and just the opportunity to work with some of the smartest folks. But that it really challenged your thinking, and also lay. It was a reminder, and still is today, that you can only control what you can control. You can't control what you can't control, and then influence those other things, and those have to be considered. And you got to practice, right? And you have to have a business that's resilient, because thinking that things are going to be stable in today's environment, like we talked about earlier, it's not realistic, right? Especially with the promise to your shareholders or to your customers.
Right on. Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Well, that's a great example of how what you did and your experience in the military led to success and getting through crisis in the civilian world and the public sector. So great. Thank you for that. Now, how does that lead us today? Like, what are you doing today? Are you going through your own transition to whatever you were before? I mean, transitions are every day, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we go from Monday to Tuesday to Wednesday. Bigger transitions are perhaps marriage, kids, going from military life to more corporate life, or even, from corporate job to corporate job, or going from 49 to 50 years old or whatever. But so what are you up to today, and where are you headed?
Yeah, well, I'm looking for my next mission.
Seeking tasking. Yeah.
I've spent a deliberate period of rest, and took a short sabbatical after a great run at Chevron, and have spent some time with family, which was good. But now I need a mission, right? And so I've been leveling up, as they say, developing my professional skills, staying close to leaders within our industry and adjacent to it, having conversations about sales and operations planning and business planning, like we talked about, which really drives me. I really enjoy it. The orchestration, the collaboration, and the natural opportunity that it has to keep score, right? We all like to win, and that's one of the other things that a veteran can bring, is that they like to win, and so that they have passion and energy and drive, and that's that's what really motivates me, and really exploring also the AI, right? And how that I believe that AI it's here, and there's a lot of opportunity for it. I look at it as not something to be afraid of, but to embrace. And I've been learning about using language models like Claude and Copilot, for example, to as part of my personal development and growth, and developing use cases on how it can be applied thoughtfully and get improvements in efficiency, productivity, or even outcomes within sales and operations planning. So I've enjoyed this time to rest, relax, yet also get to learn, because when you've been in crisis management and really in the heat of battle and working, you sometimes lose sight of the opportunity to learn new things and test your perspectives.
No, I think it's a great time in your career to be doing that too, because you're combining this great wealth of experience with the most modern technology that's out there in AI, and creating models to enhance human performance, which is basically, I mean, if these things are used for bad, which, ultimately there's somebody that's always going to try to use them for bad. But if we look at the other side of the coin and using them for good, developing the models so we can get there faster, still using our brains, not letting the AI take over the thought process, but letting our
Yeah.
brains go to higher level opportunities. And with your experience, I mean, that's exactly, you're the exact type of person to feed that model, to make it effective in that slice of expertise that you have.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I read a book, The AI Driven Leader, by this guy named Jeff Woods, and uh, it's my view that AI is a thought partner, to help take out the noise or operational overload for a leader, so they can make quality decisions, right? And what does that look like? It can synthesize a large amount of data. It can help you summarize. It can help challenge your thinking with prompts, right? I've been learning a lot about prompts on what to ask
Mm.
the chatbot or the generative AI tool to
Which is
help
really
me.
important, right? How you ask
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah, and when we think about AI, for me, and is that it's, I mean, sure, is it going to impact jobs, but I think at the end of the day, it's actually going to result in more opportunities. When you think about the industrial revolution of what jobs exist today versus before, it was a net positive. And you have to also, again, based on our military experience, you have to adapt, right? You have to be flexible. You have to learn new things and challenge yourself and keep climbing that mountain. And AI is that next mountain that I, for one, am climbing. I'm not at the top yet, and I don't think I'll ever be, but everyone should, because it's the future is now, and embrace it. And it can be a tool, to your point, used thoughtfully. When you think about what's in the news with, I guess, the Claude that decided to break out, and can, those are some scary things as well. But yeah,
Well,
I'm
it's
optimistic.
yeah, resistance is futile, basically. So, adapt, adjust, overcome. I mean, understand what's going on, situational awareness too, right? Because I
Yeah,
mean, this thing is not going away. So, I'm happy to see that you're pro pro AI and pro for that, because that just makes all the sense in the world where you come from and what you've been doing. So, John, we're closing or getting close to our
yeah,
end of time together. Are there any bits of advice that you would like to give to veterans getting out of the military, or people looking to hire veterans in their
yeah,
organizations?
sure. You know, I, my first thought is that, to the veteran, is be proud of your service,
Mm,
and be deliberate with that transition. And you'll know the time and the place when it's time to retire, or when you complete your term of service, and you want to do something else, right? And the skills and your experiences directly translate to corporate life, or the public sector, right? In terms of whether, no matter if you're enlisted, a non-commissioned officer, or a junior officer, or a field grade, the opportunities to lead teams, even if you're, and the responsibility of the equipment and the assets, those translate directly into supply chain roles, for example, operations roles, or even planning roles like the one I have. And
mm,
so, working with your peers, taking advantage of all the resources, and I'm sure, probably since I've been out 25 years, that are just so much more robust for veterans transitioning out. Take advantage of those, tap into them, whether it be with resumes, for example. I think the other piece of advice is build your network now before you
mm.
get out. I've learned that, relearned that, really, since my during my transition, is networks are so important, with people who know you, what you can do, and then reaching out to those folks, with what you can do and what you can do for them, is so important for that next step in the process, and finding that next mission, right? And the third thing is, do what you love. I and if it inspires you, motivates you, even more power, right? Because what work is work, but you still have the other part of your life, and that work-life balance, and whether it's learning or hobbies is so important, especially in a time of transition, because it really is. It's a life event, right? And
Mm.
it's not to be underestimated. Especially I had the little bit of the loss of the camaraderie
Mm.
and the brotherhood or sisterhood that the military, just with that bonds. And so culture is so important with the organization and that fit. For companies, the company I worked for, Chevron, was very progressive with veteran advocacy. They had veterans networks um, and really is a leader. And I think a lot of companies now realize what veterans can offer and contribute. And no matter what, if it's entry level sales, like how we entered our corporate careers, or in supply chain, or our logistics, right? I mean, moving stuff, workflows, standard SOPs, leading teams. Those are all skills that directly translate, right? And giving that opportunity to that veteran, they will. They're not. They're going to deliver, right? And you'll be very pleased with the results.
Fantastic. Well said. Thank you for that. And also, as far as the network is concerned, you could be considered part of the network now since you've been on this podcast. For folks who didn't know you before, how would people get a hold of you if they wanted to reach out and maybe get some advice or chat with you? Because there's a sea of, you're right, there's more robust tools than ever, but perhaps the tipping point is been exceeded. And it's sometimes to figure out the sea of things that are out there, it's good to just talk to somebody and get a little bit of advice. So how can people reach you if they're interested in talking?
Yeah, you're right. There's so much platforms out there. I'm still learning about them all. What I find a lot of value, and I'm thinking, based on my experience also with the veterans community, is LinkedIn is a great place to start.
Mm.
Build your profile, complete it all, get a good picture on there, translate your resume, your military experience into, and use Chat GPT to do it. Is an
Oh, that's
example
a
of
good
AI.
idea. Yeah, yep.
To translate your military experience, because it doesn't speak well, even though the accomplishments are real and substantial. For example, well, I was a battery executive officer of 6 howitzer batteries in charge of $10 million of equipment. There are ways that you can refine that so that makes sense to a hiring manager or a recruiter, and it speaks to them and then jumps out, right? And so that picture, that story of who you are, what you do, why you do it in that headline. Maybe I'm going back to more the advice side, but LinkedIn is a great platform that I see a lot of value in, and also reconnecting with old colleagues, whether it be from the Army or even with you, for example, is a great start. And there's some other tools out there, but you can find me on LinkedIn, John Shepard. Send me a message. I'd love to connect with you. Yeah, that's how you can find me.
Right on. Great advice. I think there's no better thing to do when you're in a time of transition, and perhaps you've got your resume built using Chat GPT or somebody helping you or whatever, and you got that out there to 500 places, and perhaps only a trickle is coming back in, or it can get demoralizing or whatever. Spend your time going through your list of old friends and reconnecting with them. Not only is it good for the soul, but these are people who are interested in helping you in your success. Right. And then people like you too, John, that, hey, I heard this podcast, and give John a call, and, he's automatically interested, as am I, in helping people out. So I think there's no better use of time than talking to people you trust, you care about, relationships, friendships that are in your corner, that are also connected and have a network of their own, and that have been doing it for a while, perhaps, right, that can think through opportunities, and may end up landing a job or whatever the next step is in the process.
Yeah. And it compounds, right? That's just spread that network out, and don't be afraid to reach out to people that you may have a common interest in, and connect and seek that information or that reference or advice, right? And be resilient, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Don't let go of that, right? You learned it early.
Never quit. You know, what do the Night Stalkers say in special operations? Night Stalkers never quit, right? But it's so true.
Right on, right on. Well, John, we sincerely appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today and help us
It's a
on
lot of
this
fun.
mission. Yeah, right on, right on. We need to keep in touch and talk more often. So that'd be good if I get down to Houston. I'm not traveling that much, but if you get up to Central Kentucky, watch some horse racing, you can always come
Get
by
some bourbon.
from bourbon on the back deck is standard. Yeah, standard.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Well, first, thanks again for the opportunity to reconnect in the conversation. I really enjoyed it, and also thank you for what you're doing, right? Creating this platform, this forum for veterans, and for us to tell our stories, and so it helps other veterans get where they want to go is really inspiring, and really appreciate it, and keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Tell us how we can do more, get more people involved. You got other friends from the Army or from Chevron that want to be on. We'd be happy to talk to them and get their perspective. There's always something new.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've got a couple actually.
Yeah.
We'll take that. We'll take that offline. Yeah, absolutely.
Right on. Sounds good, John. All right, well, that'll wrap it up today. Thank you, John, and thank you, Mobius, for providing this platform to help both transitioning vets as well as those looking to hire them in the field of maintenance and reliability. Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
Thanks, brother.
All right.